Welcome to this program in the Our Finger Lakes History Series. I am Seneca County historian Walter Gable. The topic of this program is the Richmond Aqueduct, which between 1857 and 1917 carried the waters of the enlarged Erie Canal over the Seneca River Canal in northeastern Seneca County and western Cayuga County. The original Erie Canal was constructed between 1817 and 1825. It connected Lake Erie at Buffalo with the Hudson River near Albany. The original Erie Canal was enlarged in the 1850s. In that span of 363 miles of this enlarged Erie Canal, there were 18 aqueducts to bypass rivers, streams. The Richmond Aqueduct, the subject of this program, is shown on the map with a red star. This Richmond Aqueduct was the second largest aqueduct on this enlarged Erie Canal. I have included this frame to show that there was a major change in elevation between Lake Erie and the Hudson River. I have shown with a red arrow the location of the Richmond Aqueduct over the Cayuga and Seneca Canal on the Seneca River. You will note that its location is at the eastern edge of a relatively level section of the Erie Canal. I want to make sure that you are not confusing the term aqueduct with the term lock. An aqueduct is a man-made means of carrying a water body over some kind of lower area. The ancient Romans built aqueducts to carry gravity-fed supplies of water to Rome. In the case of the Richmond Aqueduct for this program, the Richmond Aqueduct was built to carry the waters of the Erie Canal over the Seneca River or the Cayuga and Seneca Canal. To have the Erie Canal continue at the same basic water level as the Cayuga-Seneca Canal and Seneca River, the Montezuma marshes would have undergone a major reduction in their water level, and there would probably have had to be at least one lock on the enlarged Erie Canal that becomes the barge canal to handle the changes in elevation for the course of the enlarged Erie Canal. Now for just a little history of the Erie Canal. Almost immediately after its opening of the entire stretch of the Erie Canal in October 1825, the volume of traffic on the Erie Canal was great. Toll revenues were much greater than the state of New York expected. By 1834, serious talk began in the state of New York that it needed to make major renovations to the Erie Canal. The state started a project to widen and deepen the canal and to enlarge the locks so that the canal and locks could accommodate larger boats and a much heavier volume of boat traffic. It was part of this creation of the so-called enlarged Erie Canal that the Richmond Aqueduct came into being. The Richmond Aqueduct was named for von Rensselaer Richmond, who lived in Lyons, New York. Mr. Richmond had been responsible for much of the work of the enlargement of the Erie Canal in the eastern Finger Lakes region in the 1840s and early 1850s. He oversaw much of the actual construction of this Richmond Aqueduct. As for the dimensions of this Richmond Aqueduct, it is about 840 and a half feet long and 86 feet wide, making it the second longest aqueduct on the entire enlarged Erie Canal. The main construction work was stone masonry work. Onondaga limestone was used to erect 30 piers and 2 abutments, so as to create 31 arches across the Seneca River or the Cayuga-Seneca Canal. Each arch was 11 feet high and 22 feet wide. In this much more recent photo, you can see at left the grass-covered towpath on which the animals, typically 1, 2, 3 horses or mules, with a young lad walking along with the animals. The animals walked to pull with towpath ropes the boat along the Erie Canal. At right, you see the masonry frame on which the wooden trough filled with water, on which the canal boats on the Erie Canal were towed over the Seneca River. Here I show some basic construction facts. The construction of the Richmond Aqueduct began January 1849 and was completed spring 1857. The cost was a little over $216,000. The stone masonry, and imagine its weight, rested on top of a so-called mattress of logs sunk into the bottom of the Seneca River. The main reason that this aqueduct was built was to avoid having to create a set of locks where the Erie Canal would join up with the Seneca River. An aqueduct would enable a boat traveling on the Erie Canal to not have to take the time delay to go through a set of locks at that point. A common adage in the business world is that time is money. The ability to not have to negotiate or cross through a lock at the intersection with the Seneca River helped to keep down the time delay and therefore costs of transportation on the Erie Canal. As I indicated, by 1834, the Erie Canal was in need of enlargement. This was because of several reasons. One was that the Erie Canal was transporting much more than it was expected to do. A second reason was that the Erie Canal had some construction defects that were in need of action. A third reason was that there were newer, much larger boats, especially longer and even somewhat wider than what the canal locks could handle. So the New York State Legislature and Governor started a program to create the enlarged Erie Canal. The Richmond Aqueduct was really a great accomplishment as part of this enlarged Erie Canal. The construction of the stone piers and arches, as I indicated, were made of Onondaga limestone. But over 100,000 linear feet of wood pilings were driven in the ground to provide that base foundation for this stonework and for the weight of the water trough that carried the waters of the Erie Canal boats over the Seneca River. The Richmond Aqueduct was expensive. This is a close-up of one of the stone arches. I think it is rather remarkable how this picture taken recently shows how sound these stone arches are after over 150 years since their construction. Here you see the remaining eastern remnants of the Richmond Aqueduct. Over the arches was the towpath on which the horses or mules pulled a rope that moved the canal boat along the Erie Canal and over the aqueduct. To the left of this towpath is an open area that was the location of the wooden trough of water on which the boats traveled. To the left of the water, you can see clearly some of the stone piers that provided a structural support on the south side of this canal water trough. Even more clearly, in this cross-section view of the Richmond Aqueduct, you can see the open area in which the wooden water trough was built to carry the boats on the Erie Canal over the Seneca River. On one side of that open area for the trough is the towpath, and on the other side of the trough were the piers that provided support for that side of the water trough. This recent view shows again the arch construction of the Richmond Aqueduct. The arches supported the towpath. Just behind the arches in this view, you see the masonry base on which the wooden trough for the waters of the Erie Canal rested. Then in the back, you see the piers that were part of the wall supporting the south side of the water trough. This is a recent view of the remaining eastern portion of the Richmond Aqueduct. You need to remember that this Richmond Aqueduct was constructed in the 1850s, like 170 years ago, and that despite almost no maintenance since about 1917, this structure was so well constructed that the remaining portions seems very sound yet today. Here you see in the foreground a close-up of the eastern end abutment at right in one of the piers. Behind that, you see the flat masonry that supported the water trough, and in the background, the arches over which was the towpath. Starting about 1910, the state of New York was making plans for creating the barge canal system that would include the enlarged Erie Canal and other state-owned canals that connected with the enlarged Erie Canal. As part of that new barge canal system, the enlarged Erie Canal was going to connect with the Cayuga Canal and the Seneca River at a common water level of junction rather than to continue to use the Richmond Aqueduct to carry the waters of the enlarged Erie Canal over the Seneca River and canal. In other words, the Richmond Aqueduct was no longer needed. To avoid any navigational accidents and so on, the central portion of the Richmond Aqueduct was torn down. As shown in the picture at right, only 7 arches were left at the eastern end of the Richmond Aqueduct, and only 3 arches were left at the western end of the Richmond Aqueduct. People, especially in Montezuma and Cayuga County, were determined to preserve and promote what remained of the former Richmond Aqueduct. In 2011, this historic marker was erected at the entrance to the walking path of the Montezuma Heritage Park, leading down to the eastern remains of the Richmond Aqueduct. Here you see information about the Montezuma Heritage Park on the east shore of the Seneca River. You can park your car and walk the path of the 160-acre park to see the remaining 7 arches and so on of the eastern portion of the Richmond Aqueduct. In 2005, the Seneca River Crossing Canals Historic District was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. This Seneca River Crossings Canal Historic District included the remnants of the Richmond Aqueduct on both the Cayuga County and Seneca County sides of the Seneca River. This is an aerial view that shows the starred location of the Richmond Aqueduct near the top center of this view. At left lower center, the arrow points out that on Chapman Road in town of Montezuma, one can park a vehicle and then walk the path to the Richmond Aqueduct. In this first of several Gribble Nation internet visuals, I will show recent views of the remnants of the Richmond Aqueduct. This frame shows one of the abutments at one end of the Richmond Aqueduct. This is a view of the former towpath just east of the Richmond Aqueduct. The towpath, as I've indicated, was used by animals, typically 1, 2, 3 horses or mules, being led by a young lad so that the animals would pull the boat along the canal by means of a tow rope. This frame shows remnants of the piers on the southern side of the Richmond Aqueduct, with the center section being the masonry frame that supported the wooden trough for the waters of the Erie Canal, and at very right, a portion of the towpath. Here you get a good view of the limestone masonry of the Richmond Aqueduct. This is a recent photo, so you get a better idea once again of just how well built this stone aqueduct has proven to be. This is a close-up of the limestone masonry frame that supported the wooden frame for the trough of water that carried the Erie Canal boats over the Seneca River while they were on the Erie Canal. This view shows what the towpath looks like today. This is a recent view of the eastern portion of the Richmond Aqueduct as it looks today. Let me make a few summary comments. First, this Richmond Aqueduct was completed in 1857 as part of the enlarged Erie Canal project. It carried the waters of the Erie Canal over the Seneca River and Seneca Canal so as to avoid having to have time-consuming locks at this junction. When the state of New York was creating the barge canal system in the 1910s, the state decided to abandon the Richmond Aqueduct and have the Erie Canal junction at the Seneca River be at a common water level. The center section of the Richmond Aqueduct was demolished so as not to impede boat traffic on the Seneca River and Canal. The importance of this Richmond Aqueduct is reflected in that it has been placed on the National Register, and that the remaining eastern portions of the Richmond Aqueduct are part of the Montezuma Historic District and can be viewed up close by the walking public. I hope that this program has enhanced your knowledge of the Richmond Aqueduct. Its history is an important part of our Finger Lakes history.